We've got some pretty fun things coming in the future for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is not really something I've gotten to say over the last year due to something that I'm not going to mention because reasons. One thing we've got to look forward to is the multitude of Disney Plus series that are bringing with them some awesome characters who a lot of us never really expected to see get a big budget adaptation. One such character is Marc Spector, aka Moon Knight. This Batman-esque vigilante is one of those characters that a lot of mainstream audiences probably never heard of. However, Marvel has shown that they have the ability to take B and C tier heroes and turn them into superstars. And one solid way they could achieve that with MK is by bringing in some other characters in order to help sell the overall package that is the show. They could even use it as a platform to launch some that we haven't seen yet. So in this video, I'm going to break down a small handful of characters that I think could make an appearance in Moon Knight. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Okay, so let's start this list off by bringing up one character who is pretty heavily rumored to be making at least an appearance on the show, if not coming in as a full-on supporting character. That being Blade. This rumor basically revolves around the idea that the character Ethan Hawke is playing within Moon Knight is none other than the big bad vampire himself, Dracula. If this does wind up being the case, then bringing in Blade would make sense here. Cause you know, the whole vampire thing. He kinda has a problem with vampires. Imagine it. Blade could show up, and instead of just being a fancy cameo as many would expect of most character appearances, he could wind up being a strong supporting character, helping out Moon Knight as he takes on the Lord of Vampires and stops him from probably doing something shady in the underworld of New York City. This could also set up something that not a lot of people have talked about, but could be extremely cool. That being a possible future Midnight Suns movie. For those of you who don't know who the Midnight Suns are, they are basically a super team that was put together with the express purpose of dealing with the supernatural threats that the Avengers aren't really all that suited to take on regularly. Both Moon Knight and Blade have been members, along with a few others that I'm going to be bringing up on the list here in a little bit. So it could be something that they might be building towards. And if they are indeed going that route, then having Blade and Moon Knight team up on this show could be a great first step. Of course, if Blade does come along, then there is the possibility that Dane Whitman, aka the Black Knight, might not be too far behind him. Now, you might be understandably confused. How are Blade and Black Knight connected? Well, in the mid-credit scene of The Eternals, we briefly hear a mysterious voice talking to Whitman as he stared down at the ebony blade. That voice apparently belonged to Blade, if the director of the movie is to be believed. Which, I mean, if you can't believe the director, who can you believe? She'd probably know better than anyone who it is that's supposed to be talking there. So presumably the two characters are now working together. Not quite sure to what degree, but the connection is there. Now, okay, as far as any kind of relationship between Black Knight and Moon Knight, well, there really isn't any kind of major link between the two in the comics. No real serious moments where they've interacted. However, it could be another case of potential setup for a Midnight Suns team-up. Yes, Black Knight hasn't actually been a part of the team in the past, but given his magical origins, he could make sense as a potential member. Couple that with his relationship with Blade, another character that could feasibly make an appearance on the show, and suddenly you've got yet another character who could possibly spring up. Next up, we have the final entry on this list that is going to fit into this weird little Midnight Suns mini-theory that I've got going on here. That, of course, being the sometimes leader of the team himself, Doctor Strange. Strange has been having quite the time in the MCU as of late, with a version of him playing a massive role in the Disney Plus series What If, and the main continuity one appearing in Spider-Man No Way Home near the end of this year. He seems to be pretty much everywhere. So why not have him spring up in the Moon Knight series? This could work on a couple of different levels. First is, of course, the aforementioned Midnight Suns team up that I've already mentioned. As the leader of the group, it would make sense for him to show up, possibly doing some recruiting, as it were. However, there is another possible reason for Strange's inclusion that hasn't been touched upon here yet. See, the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe seems destined to be focused on the idea of the multiverse. So naturally, one could assume that the events of Moon Knight may, either directly or otherwise, play into that idea to some degree. And who else better to show up to help explain things to old MK than Doc Strange himself, the man who's actually traveled to another dimension personally. Well, okay, kind of. He flew into the dark dimension as Dormammu was merging it with the main dimension, so technically they were sort of one and the same, but still you get my point. Actually, you know what? I lied. I'm gonna call an audible mid-video here and include one more entry hinting at a possible Midnight Suns crossover, cause I just had a wild idea. Okay, so this one's really out of left field, but just run with me here for a second. What if all this Midnight Suns stuff is actually something we'll see in Moon Knight? What could it all be building towards? Well, my thought on all of it is actually pretty simple. It leads to the Multiverse of Madness. The Doctor Strange sequel is currently set to be the next time that we see Wanda Maximoff, who left us with quite the tease at the end of WandaVision, showing us that she might just be up to some rather dark stuff, all of which seems to be revolving around the Darkhold, or Book of the Damned. This book has led to some pretty serious stuff in the comics, including several situations that the Midnight Suns were brought in to deal with. So what if the stuff Wanda is up to gets the attention of Strange, who in turn recruits Moon Knight along with others to go take care of the situation, leading directly into Multiverse of Madness. Sure, it sounds like something that would be reserved for a post-credit scene, but it still totally counts. Might not necessarily be a direct appearance for Wanda, as it'll probably be Strange or someone associated with him explaining the situation to Moon Knight, but it's my video, so I say it counts. It sounds like something I might have to do another video on at some point down the road. Maybe subscribe to the channel so you can know if and when that comes out. Sorry for the shameless plug, but you know, gotta pay the bills and all that. Okay, done with the Midnight Suns, I promise. For those of you who are maybe not the most familiar with the character of Moon Knight, the location where he most commonly operates is the Big Apple itself, New York City. You know who else is in New York City? Well, okay, most of the heroes in the MCU. But I'm specifically talking about Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk. Marvel has the tendency to introduce characters who are getting solo outings in earlier entries in the franchise. It's kind of their whole shtick. So with She-Hulk getting her own show in the near future, it would make sense for Moon Knight to give us her big debut. Maybe she'll get a cameo appearance. She is a lawyer, and Marc Spector is likely going to need a pretty good one after all those bad guys he'll probably beat up start pressing charges. So perhaps she'll show up and offer him her services. Could be a cool little bit of establishing her character before she goes and gets turned into a big green rage monster like her cousin. Of course, there is another lawyer within the Marvel Universe that could show up to help defend the white-clad vigilante. When Marvel and Netflix had their little falling out, leading to the cancellation of the Marvel shows on the platform, the future of characters such as the Devil of Hell's Kitchen seemed pretty bleak, those versions of them at least. However, over the last few months, we have been hearing rumors that Charlie Cox was going to be reprising his role as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home, perhaps serving as legal counsel for Peter Parker in the case of the supposed murder of Mysterio. Now, this isn't confirmed at all at this point, but if it is true, we could see Murdock becoming something of a superhero lawyer, specializing in defending masked vigilantes who get charged with crimes in the line of duty. Something that Moon Knight might just need. Plus, being more of a street-level hero, it would make sense for Moon Knight and Daredevil to get teamed up to a certain degree, though their differing religious views might just bring them into conflict. Not direct conflict, like fighting each other, but you know, good old bickering. Either way, I'd love to see it. Honestly, I just want Daredevil back. I feel like that's not asking for too much. Charlie Cox just did way too dang good of a job in the role to not use him some more. Earlier on in this video, I mentioned the possibility of Dracula serving as the main baddie of Moon Knight. While that might just be the case, there is always the possibility of someone else filling in that role. As more of a street level hero, it would probably be best to find him one that fits that more grounded threat level. And when I think of street level superhero action, there is one villain that immediately springs to my mind, that being Kingpin. Kingpin is one of those villains that has faced off against several different heroes, such as Spider-Man and Daredevil. As such, he doesn't really belong exclusively to any one hero's rogues gallery, so there's really nothing to say that he can't pop up in Moon Knight, especially if Matt Murdock does make an appearance. since the Netflix show paired Daredevil and Kingpin against each other so perfectly. Vincent D'Onofrio did such a good job in the role, it would be awesome to see this version of the character back in some way. And I mean, the Netflix Kingpin could fit the more raw tone that the Moon Knight comics usually go for. This is a hero who suffers from some pretty serious mental illness presented in a fairly dark way, unlike something like how Deadpool does it. So why not use this darker show as a way to bring back the crime lord of New York City? Of course, if you're gonna have Kingpin show up, you might as well also bring in everyone's favorite webhead, Spider-Man. Being a super prominent hero in New York City, it would make sense that there is a serious chance Moon Knight will run into some of the other crime fighters who also operate out of the Big Apple. And when you think of New York, the first one that probably comes to mind for most people is Spider-Man. Now, it is certainly something that I don't really see being super likely. Spider-Man is arguably too big of a character to have pop up in a cameo or something small like that. However, it is worth pointing out that while Marvel needs to work with Sony whenever they want to put Spider-Man into a movie, they don't have to do the same thing with television appearances. So there really isn't anything stopping them from bringing him in there. Plus, Disney Plus shows seem to have attracted some pretty big characters, and big name actors largely seem cool with appearing on the small screen, so who knows? Either way, it could be really cool to see these two characters fighting bad guys like Kingpin together, even if only for a brief time. As I said, not super likely, but hey, a guy can dream, can he? But what could an appearance by Spider-Man in Moon Knight actually look like? Honestly, it's way too early to tell, as it would really depend on how No Way Home shakes out. As it stands, a lot of people think that No Way Home might be the last time that we see Peter Parker in the proper MCU. And if that does indeed wind up being the case, then who knows what we might expect from Moon Knight. Maybe there will be a Spider-Man who shows up, but maybe it won't be Peter Parker. I know I said I wasn't going to mention them again, but a member of the Midnight Suns was Ben Reilly, as in the clone Peter Parker. So maybe we might get something there. Who knows? Okay, now that we're getting to the end of the video, why not bust out some of the crazier options that aren't exactly the most likely thing in the world, but could be a ton of fun if they turned out to be true. Starting with the Thunderbolts. Don't know who the Thunderbolts are? They're sort of Marvel's version of the Suicide Squad. I feel like that explains it perfectly. Moon Knight's connection to the Thunderbolts goes back to the Superhuman Registration Act. You know, that thing that they changed into the Sokovia Accords in the MCU. They're both basically the same thing. See, Moon Knight became a registered hero, but shortly afterwards he kinda just went, man, screw that noise, and defied the laws, resulting in a warrant being put out for his arrest. Who stepped up to fulfill that warrant? The team of quote-unquote heroes called the Thunderbolts, led by Norman Osborn himself. MK quickly found himself facing off against the likes of Venom, Moonstone, Songbird, and others in a series of rather intense battles. Is this something that we're really that likely to see in Moon Knight? No, probably not, especially considering the fact that most of the main characters on that team haven't been introduced to the MCU yet. And I kinda doubt that they would use Moon Knight as a platform to introduce Norman Osborn, a character that they'd probably want to save for a Spider-Man movie. That being said, I could see it being a general plot point. The whole breaking of the Sokovia Accords thing, I mean. Not the Thunderbolts side of it. Then again, the Accords seem to have been completely forgotten after the blip, as it hasn't really been mentioned. So maybe it's just null and void in a post-Thanos war. Who knows if that even could factor into things. Finally, we have this absolute legend. Dr. Doom is arguably one of, if not the, greatest villain in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. While his big screen outings haven't exactly been, how you say, good, we all totally expect him to come back at some point, especially now that Disney and Marvel have the rights to the Fantastic Four and all associated characters. With a Fantastic Four film currently slated to close out the end of Phase 4 of the MCU, it would make sense to start laying the groundwork for that movie. So why not use a show like Moon Knight to introduce Dr. Doom with a smaller role, before building him up into a much bigger threat later on down the line? Why Moon Knight though? Why introduce him here? I did just say that I don't think they'd use Moon Knight to introduce a character like Norman Osborn, so why does Dr. Doom fit? Well, for no other reason than the fact that the two characters have faced off before on a few different occasions. So there is definitely a pre-existing relationship there that would make this show an appropriate series for him to debut in. Plus, Doctor Doom is one of a handful of characters who has at some point attempted to wield the power of the Darkhold, which could be a plot point that Marvel could work into the series if they do decide to bring in the Midnight Suns. I know, I said I was done with all that, but come on, I just had to bring it up here. The connections just seem too awesome to not get excited talking about. Cut me some slack here. Hey there everyone, I'm John Aljets. I made this video, and I want to know what you think. Are you excited for Moon Knight? Who do you think will show up? Let me know in the comments below or shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.